There was a moment in American history when the future looked different than it does now. Not better or worse, just different. Clearer, maybe. More certain. If you were young in the 1950s or 60s, the future wasn't a mystery. It was a promise, and that promise was everywhere you looked. You saw it at the World's Fair, where full-sized houses of tomorrow stood complete with kitchens that cooked by themselves and beds that knew when you were tired. You saw it in Life magazine, in full-page spreads showing families having breakfast in flying cars, children doing homework while robots cleaned around them. You saw it on television, on shows like The Jetsons, which wasn't really fantasy to us. It was a preview. General Motors built an entire exhibit called Futurama, where you sat in a moving chair and traveled through a miniature world of 1960, showing what life would look like in 1980. Highways that never had traffic, cities that never had smog, homes where no one did housework because machines handled everything. 2 million people a year went through that exhibit. They came out believing what they'd seen. The government believed it too. President Johnson talked about the Great Society, about using technology and abundance to end poverty, to give everyone a good life. Scientists and engineers appeared on news programs explaining that yes, we'd have bases on the moon, yes, we'd vacation in space, yes, the average work week would drop to 20 hours because automation would free us from drudgery. This wasn't advertising trying to sell you something. This was serious people, respected people, describing what they saw coming. In 1966, Time magazine ran a cover asking, "Will man outgrow the Earth?" The article inside discussed not whether we'd colonize space, but when and how many people would go. The assumption was that Earth would become too small for humanity's growth, so we'd naturally expand outward. The New York Times printed articles about automated highways where cars drove themselves, expected by 1975. The Department of Commerce published reports on the home of 1985 with detailed descriptions of houses that managed themselves. Major corporations spent millions building prototypes of these futures and displaying them publicly, not as dreams but as products in development. Bell Telephone demonstrated video phones at the 1964 World's Fair. You could sit in a booth in New York and see someone in California while you talked to them. The line to try it stretched for hours. People waited because they wanted to experience what their living rooms would have in just a few years. A tent announced they'd have the picture phone in regular service by 1970. They built the infrastructure. They were certain this was happening. Westinghouse created a time capsule in 1965, meant to be opened in the year 6965. Inside, they put objects and descriptions of current life, but also predictions for the near future. They included pills that would replace meals, expecting those within a decade. They included descriptions of household robots, weather control, and disease elimination, all expected before the year 2000. Boeing, the company building airplanes, had a division working on flying cars for regular consumers. Not concept art, actual prototypes that flew. They believed that by 1980, maybe 1985, these would be as common as station wagons. They were investing real money because they were certain the market would exist. There was a time when we believed the morning would take care of itself, not someday far away, but soon. Maybe by 1980, maybe by 1990. The future felt close enough to touch, and it looked like this. You'd wake up without an alarm because the house would know when you'd had enough sleep. The curtains would slide open on their own, letting in just the right amount of light. The room would already be the perfect temperature. You wouldn't have to think about any of it. We saw this in magazines. We saw it at the World's Fair. We saw it on television shows where families lived in homes that seemed to hum with invisible helpers. The idea wasn't strange. It felt natural, like progress always did back then. One year we got automatic washers, the next year dishwashers. So why not a whole house that understood what you needed before you even asked? The bed itself was supposed to be part of this. It would adjust while you slept, keeping your back perfectly aligned, maybe even massaging you gently as you woke. Some people said the bed would take your pulse, check your health, and if something seemed wrong, it might even call a doctor before you got up. This wasn't science fiction to us. This was just what came next. Getting out of bed meant stepping onto floors that were always warm, never cold tile, shocking your feet awake. The bathroom already knew you were coming. The shower turned itself on. The water exactly the temperature you liked. Maybe the mirror told you the weather or reminded you of appointments. These weren't computers the way we think of them now. They were just smart objects, things that paid attention and helped. We believed this because we'd already seen so much change so quickly. Our parents grew up with ice boxes and coal stoves. We had refrigerators and electric ranges. Our grandparents washed clothes by hand. We had machines that did it while we did something else. Every few years, something new appeared that made life a little bit easier, a little bit cleaner, a little bit faster. So when someone showed us a house where everything worked together, where you didn't have to manage all these separate pieces, it just seemed like the logical next step. The morning routine we knew, the one with all its small tasks and decisions, was supposed to fade away. You wouldn't have to remember to turn things on or off. You wouldn't have to adjust anything. The house would know your patterns. It would learn your family's rhythms. If you usually had coffee at 7:15, the coffee would be ready at 7:15. If your daughter needed the bathroom at 7:30, the house would make sure the water was hot by then. This wasn't about being lazy. That's not how we thought about it. This was about having time for what mattered. If the house handled the small mechanical parts of the morning, you could actually talk to your family at breakfast. You could think about your day. You could be a person instead of a manager of switches and dials and timers. The companies that made appliances told us this was coming. The engineers and designers promised it. The government talked about the automated home like it was a sure thing, part of America's bright future. When you're young and everything around you keeps getting better year after year, you don't question whether it will keep going. You just assume it will. So we imagined our mornings transformed. We imagined waking up rested because the bed took care of us. We imagined rooms that were always comfortable, always ready. We imagined starting each day without friction, without the dozen small irritations that came with managing a household. It seemed reasonable. It seemed close. It seemed like the world we'd actually live in. Maybe by the time we had kids of our own. Maybe by the time we were the age our parents were then. The kitchen was where the future felt most real, because the kitchen was where the work was. Every morning, every evening, someone stood there preparing food, cleaning up, putting things away, doing it all over again. So when they told us the kitchen would run itself, we paid attention. This wasn't a fantasy. This was a promise that the hardest daily work would simply stop being hard. Breakfast was supposed to come from buttons and dials. You'd set what you wanted the night before, and in the morning it would be ready. Eggs cooked perfectly, bacon crisp, toast golden, not microwaved, not reheated, but actually cooked fresh while you were still asleep. The kitchen would know how many people were home, how much to make, when to have it done. They showed us kitchens like this at exhibitions. Clean white surfaces, everything built in, nothing sitting out on counters. The stove knew what temperature each pan needed. The oven could cook 4 different things at 4 different heats and have them all finish at the same time. These weren't complicated explanations with wiring diagrams. They just showed you a woman pressing a few buttons and then sitting down to read, and later a meal appearing, perfect and hot. Food itself was going to change. We heard about meals in pill form, about complete nutrition in a tablet you could swallow with water, dinner in a capsule. But that was always the extreme version, the one for astronauts maybe, or for people in a real hurry. What we expected for regular life was simpler. Food that came frozen in special containers. Food that the kitchen would take from the freezer and prepare automatically. Food that would taste fresh even though no one cooked it in the traditional way. The refrigerator was supposed to become something more than cold storage. It would keep inventory. It would know you were running low on milk or eggs or butter. Someday, they said, it would probably just order what you needed, and the delivery would arrive before you even noticed you were out. The refrigerator would take care of the planning part of feeding a family. Dishes were supposed to disappear as a problem. We already had dishwashers, but they were just the beginning. The next step was dishes that cleaned themselves, or dishes you threw away after one use, or maybe no dishes at all, just food served in edible containers or on surfaces that wiped clean instantly. No more standing at the sink, no more drying and putting away. The kitchen would reset itself like a machine, ready for the next meal. We believed this because cooking was real work. Not the fun kind where you tried a new recipe on Sunday. The everyday kind, 3 times a day, every single day, where you had to think about what to make and whether you had the ingredients and how long it would take and whether everyone would eat it. Taking that weight off seemed like the most obvious gift technology could give. People didn't talk about losing the skill of cooking or losing the pleasure of it. That wasn't part of the conversation. The assumption was that you'd still cook when you wanted to, for enjoyment, for special occasions, but you wouldn't have to cook out of necessity. The kitchen would handle necessity. You'd handle joy. At night, cleaning up was supposed to be automatic too. Scraps would vanish down disposal units that could handle anything. Surfaces would clean themselves or need just a single wipe. The counters would be clear, the sink empty, everything in its place without anyone spending 20 minutes putting the kitchen back together. This vision of the kitchen came from watching our mothers and grandmothers spend so much of their lives in that one room. It came from knowing how much time and energy went into keeping everyone fed. So when someone said that could change, that machines could do it, that the future kitchen would think for itself and leave people free for other things, it didn't sound crazy. It sounded fair. It sounded like progress keeping its promise. Getting dressed in the morning was supposed to become simple in a way we'd never known. Not just easier, but actually simple. The clothes themselves would be different. The whole idea of what you wore and how you took care of it was going to change, and soon. We heard about paper clothes first. Not flimsy paper, but something that looked and felt like fabric. Something you could wear all day and be comfortable. You'd wear it once, maybe twice, and then throw it away. No washing, no ironing, no mending. Just done with it. New clothes whenever you wanted them, and they'd be cheap enough that everyone could afford to do this. The magazines showed dresses made of paper, bright colors and patterns that would have been expensive in regular cloth. They showed men's shirts you could toss after wearing. For a while, you could actually buy these things. People tried them. It seemed like the beginning of something that would keep going until all our clothes worked this way. But paper was just the start. The real future fabric was supposed to be some kind of plastic material, something durable but also disposable. Or maybe not disposable, but so easy to clean that you could just rinse it in the sink and it would dry in minutes. Stains wouldn't stick to it. It wouldn't wrinkle. You could fold it into a tiny square and shake it out later, perfectly smooth. Some of the ideas went further. Clothes that adjusted their temperature, keeping you cool when it was hot and warm when it was cold. You wouldn't need different wardrobes for different seasons. One good suit or dress would work year-round because it would adapt. The fabric would breathe when you needed it to, and insulate when you needed that instead. Shoes were part of this too. They talked about shoes with air cushions built in, so comfortable you'd forget you were wearing them. Shoes that molded to your exact foot shape. Shoes that never wore out because the soles were made of some new material that couldn't be scuffed or torn. Walking would feel like floating. Getting dressed wouldn't take any time because you wouldn't have to think about it. Everything would fit. Everything would be comfortable. Everything would be appropriate for wherever you were going. Maybe you'd have a closet that suggested what to wear based on the weather and your schedule. Maybe the clothes themselves would come out of a machine that made them fresh each morning to your specifications. We thought about this because getting dressed was another one of those daily tasks that took more effort than it seemed like it should. Finding something clean, making sure it wasn't wrinkled, making sure it matched, making sure it was right for the day. And then at the end of the day, dealing with the laundry, the dry cleaning, the ironing, the folding, the hanging up, the putting away. It was endless. The future promised to cut through all of that. Laundry would become almost nothing. Maybe you'd still wash some things, but most clothes would either clean themselves or be cheap enough to replace. Ironing would disappear completely. Closets would be smaller because you wouldn't need to store seasons' worth of clothes. Everything about the daily management of what you wore would get lighter. This fit with everything else we expected. The house was getting smarter, the kitchen was getting automated, so of course what we wore would get simpler too. It was all part of the same idea, that the repetitive tasks, the maintenance work of just living, would fade into the background, handled by better materials and better design. Nobody worried about losing craftsmanship or tradition. We still had that if we wanted it. This was about everyday life, about getting through the week without spending so much energy on things that didn't really matter. Wearing fresh clothes shouldn't be hard work. In the future, it wouldn't be. Leaving the house meant getting in the car, and the car was where some of the biggest changes were supposed to happen. Not someday in the distant future. Soon, within our lifetimes. Maybe even within a decade or two. The car would drive itself. That was the central promise. You'd get in, tell it where you wanted to go, and then you'd sit back. You could read the newspaper. You could have a conversation with your family. You could sleep if you wanted to. The car would know the route, watch the road, handle everything. Driving would stop being something you did and become something that just happened while you did other things. This seemed completely reasonable to us. We'd watched cars change so much already. Our grandparents cranked engines by hand. Our parents still had to shift gears manually. We had automatic transmission, power steering, power brakes. Every few years, the car did more of the work for you, so a car that did all the work, that drove itself from start to finish, just seemed like the next logical step. They tested these cars. We saw them on television. They ran on special tracks with wires buried in the road, and the cars followed those wires perfectly, staying in lane, keeping distance from each other, never wavering. The engineers said this could work on regular highways. They said it would be safer than human drivers. They said once enough roads had the system, most accidents would disappear. But the real dream went beyond that. The real dream was cars that flew, not airplanes, not helicopters, just cars with the ability to lift off the ground and travel through the air, taking the direct route to wherever you needed to go. Every family would have one. You'd drive on the road when you were going somewhere close, and you'd fly when you needed to go farther. We saw drawings of this. We saw models, sleek vehicles that looked like cars but with small wings or propellers, sitting in ordinary driveways, ordinary garages. The sky would have lanes just like roads did, but in 3 dimensions. So there'd always be room, never any traffic jams. You'd rise up above your neighborhood and set a course and arrive at work or the store or your friend's house without ever touching the ground. Getting a flying car didn't seem impossible. We already had airplanes that regular people could fly. We had helicopters. Someone would figure out how to make it simple enough and cheap enough that it became normal. Maybe not for everyone right away, but eventually. The way cars themselves had started out expensive and rare and ended up in every driveway. Even without flying, regular cars were supposed to become almost living spaces. Wide, comfortable seats that adjusted to fit you. Windows that tinted automatically in bright sun. Air conditioning that kept everything perfect. The car would be quiet inside, smooth, like riding in a living room that happened to be moving. Traffic itself was supposed to disappear, not just because of flying cars, but because cities would be designed better. Moving sidewalks would carry people short distances, so you wouldn't need a car for every little errand. Roads would be wider, better planned with fewer stops. Or maybe cars would travel in convoys, all linked together, moving at the same speed, perfectly synchronized. The morning commute that we knew, the one where you sat in traffic, watching the same stoplights, going slowly, sometimes frustratingly slowly, was supposed to end. Either the car would handle it while you relaxed, or you'd fly over it, or the traffic wouldn't exist in the first place because the whole system would work better. We believed this because transportation had already changed our lives so completely. Our great-grandparents rarely went more than a few miles from where they were born. Our grandparents saw cars appear and change everything. Our parents saw highways built across the country. We saw cars become faster, more comfortable, more reliable. The pattern was clear. Things got better. Travel got easier. The next step would make it easier still. The cities we lived in were just the beginning. The real cities, the ones we'd live in soon, would rise up and spread out in ways that seemed almost unimaginable, except we could imagine them because people kept showing us exactly what they'd look like. Buildings would be taller than anything we'd seen, not just a few stories taller, but hundreds of stories. Whole neighborhoods stacked vertically with apartments and offices and stores all in one massive structure. You could live on the 100th floor and never need to go down to the ground except maybe once a week, maybe less. These towers would be connected, bridges between buildings at different levels, so you could walk from one tower to another without ever touching the street. Or maybe enclosed tunnels, climate-controlled, moving walkways inside them carrying you along. The city would become a network of high places, with the ground level almost forgotten. Some people talked about cities under domes, giant transparent domes covering entire downtown areas, keeping the weather out, keeping the temperature perfect year-round. No more rain on your way to work, no more snow to shovel, no more extreme heat or bitter cold. Inside the dome, it would always be 70 degrees and pleasant. We saw paintings of this. Beautiful cities with clear domes arching over them. The buildings inside clean and white, gardens growing everywhere because the climate was controlled. It looked peaceful. It looked organized. It looked like a place where everything worked the way it was supposed to. Other cities would be built out over water, platforms extending from the coast, or even floating cities in the middle of the ocean. When you ran out of land, you just built on water. The technology was coming, they said. The materials were getting better. Soon it would be cheaper to build a city on the ocean than to try to fit more people into the crowded land we already had. Some of the wildest ideas had cities that moved. Whole communities on giant platforms with tracks underneath, slowly rolling across the country, stopping in different places depending on the season. You could live in a warm climate in winter and a cool one in summer without ever changing houses. Your house would just move with the city. Even regular cities were supposed to change completely. The streets we knew, the grid patterns, the intersections with stoplights, all of that was supposed to disappear. Future cities would separate traffic by level. Cars on one level, pedestrians on another, delivery trucks on a third. Everything flowing smoothly because nothing crossed paths with anything else. Parks would be everywhere, but not on the ground. Rooftop parks, gardens hanging between buildings, green spaces on the 50th floor with trees and grass and places for children to play. You wouldn't lose nature by building up. You'd bring nature up with you. The buildings themselves would do more than just stand there. They'd breathe somehow, cleaning the air. They'd collect rainwater and recycle it. They'd generate their own power from the sun or the wind. A building would be a machine for living, but also a machine that took care of itself and the people inside it. We accepted these visions because cities were already changing fast. Our parents grew up in cities that looked one way, and by the time we were teenagers, those same cities looked different. Taller buildings, bigger highways, new developments spreading out. If that much could change in 20 or 30 years, what could change in 50? The future city wasn't going to be crowded and dirty and difficult. It was going to be clean and organized and easy. You'd live up high with a view of everything. You'd move through the city smoothly, quickly. The air would be clean because the buildings filtered it. The temperature would be comfortable because domes or climate control kept it that way. None of this seemed like fantasy. It seemed like planning. It seemed like the obvious way to handle the fact that more people needed places to live and work. You couldn't just keep building out forever. You had to build up, build smart, build with new materials and new ideas. The cities of the future would be nothing like the cities of the past, and that was good. That was progress. The job you went to every day was supposed to change more than almost anything else. Not the kind of work you did, necessarily, but how much of it you had to do, and how hard it would be. By the year 2000, they told us, most people would work maybe 20 hours a week. Some said 15. The work week we knew, 40 hours, 5 days, was going to seem as old-fashioned as the 6-day weeks our grandparents worked. Machines would do most of the labor, and people would be left with the thinking parts, the creative parts, the parts that actually mattered. This wasn't a dream. This was economists and scientists and business leaders telling us what was coming. They'd done the math. They'd seen how much more productive each worker had become with better tools and better machines. That curve just kept going up. Eventually, you wouldn't need people to work that much because machines would be so capable. Factories were the clearest example. Assembly lines would be completely automated. Robots, though we didn't always call them that yet, would do the repetitive work. Lifting, moving, assembling, checking. The dangerous jobs, the boring jobs, the jobs that wore your body down, machines would handle all of it. People would supervise, make decisions, fix problems when they came up. But the actual physical work would be done by metal and electricity. Offices would change too. Filing would be automatic. Record keeping would be handled by machines. Even things like answering phones and taking messages would be done by systems that didn't need people. The secretary sitting at a desk typing all day, that job would evolve into something else, something that required less time because the machines did the routine parts. The assumption was that this would be good for everyone. Companies would be more profitable because they could produce more with less effort. Workers would have more free time with family, more time for hobbies and travel and all the things people wanted to do but couldn't because work took up so much of life. We'd work in the morning maybe and have the afternoon free, or work 3 days a week and have 4 days off. The weekend would expand. Vacation time would expand. Retirement would come earlier. All of this seemed inevitable because productivity kept rising, and that productivity had to benefit someone. It would benefit all of us. The office building itself was supposed to become a different kind of place. Everything voice activated. You'd speak your letter and it would be typed and sent. You'd ask for a file and it would appear. The information you needed would come to you instead of you having to go find it. Meetings would happen over video screens, so you wouldn't have to travel. Maybe you wouldn't even have to go to the office most days. You'd work from home, connected to everything you needed through wires and screens. People talked about this without worry. There wasn't much concern about what people would do with all that free time. The assumption was that we'd figure it out, that more leisure was obviously better than less. We'd spend time with our children. We'd learn new things. We'd travel. We'd pursue interests that we'd never had time for. The job for life, the career that lasted 40 years with one company, that was still the model. But it would be a lighter version. You'd be loyal to the company and the company would be loyal to you. And together you'd both benefit from the machines doing more and more of the actual work. Nobody really talked about jobs disappearing completely. The idea was that jobs would change, get easier, require less time, but they'd still be there. You'd still have a role. You'd still be part of the economy. You just wouldn't have to work yourself to exhaustion to be part of it. This felt true because we'd already seen it happen in some ways. Our grandparents worked until they couldn't anymore. Our parents got benefits, got some vacation time, got retirement plans. We had it better than they did. Our children, we thought, would have it better than us. The direction was clear. Work was becoming less of a burden with each generation. Soon it would barely be a burden at all. Evening came, and with it the same question every family faced. What's for dinner? But in the future we imagined that question would have a simple answer every time. Whatever you wanted, ready in minutes, perfect every time, without any real work. The automatic kitchen we'd left in the morning would be waiting. You'd come home and press a few buttons, maybe turn a dial, and dinner would begin preparing itself. Not microwaving leftovers, actually cooking. Meat would cook to the right temperature. Vegetables would steam until they were just tender. Everything would be ready at the same time, and it would all be hot. They showed us freezers full of complete meals, each one in its own container, each one designed to go straight into the automatic oven or cooker. You'd choose what you wanted days ahead, and the kitchen would pull it from the freezer at the right time, thaw it properly, cook it properly, serve it properly. Your only job would be choosing. But the bigger idea was about food itself changing. Scientists were working on ways to grow food without farms, or with farms that barely resembled farms. Meat grown in laboratories, not from animals but from cells, identical to regular meat but made faster, cleaner, more efficiently. Vegetables grown in nutrient solutions under lights, no soil needed, no seasons limiting what you could have. This meant you could have strawberries in January, fresh tomatoes in December, anything you wanted any time of year because it would all be grown in controlled environments. Taste wouldn't suffer. Quality wouldn't suffer. It would actually be better because everything would be optimized, grown in perfect conditions every time. The meals themselves would be balanced automatically. The kitchen would know what nutrients you needed and make sure dinner provided them. If you'd had too much of something earlier in the day, dinner would compensate. If you needed more protein or vitamins, dinner would include that. You'd eat better without thinking about it. Some people still talked about food pills, about getting all your nutrition from a few tablets. But by the 60s, that idea had mostly faded. What remained was the idea of convenience, of good food that didn't require effort. The family dinner would still exist, but the stress of preparing it would be gone. Serving dinner meant the table set itself, maybe, or at least the dishes came out clean and ready from some storage system that also cleaned them. You'd sit down together as a family and the food would be there, and you could actually talk, actually be together, instead of someone being exhausted from cooking while everyone else waited. After dinner, cleanup would take seconds. Dishes into a machine that didn't just wash them, but sterilized them, dried them, put them away. Or maybe dishes that you threw away, but not wasteful, something that dissolved or composted or recycled perfectly. The kitchen would reset itself while you moved to the living room. We believed all this because we'd already seen frozen dinners. We'd seen cake mixes and instant potatoes and all these small steps toward easier cooking. The frozen dinner seemed like magic when it first appeared. You opened a box, heated it up, and ate. It wasn't fancy, but it was food without work. The next step would be frozen dinners that actually tasted like home cooking, and then food that cooked itself, and then finally food that required almost no thought at all. The idea wasn't to lose the pleasure of a good meal. Special occasions would still be special. Sunday dinner could still be elaborate if you wanted it to be. But Tuesday night, Thursday night, the regular weeknight dinner that had to happen whether you had energy for it or not, that would stop being a weight. That would become easy. Eating well was supposed to stop being something you had to work at. It would just be what happened, naturally, because the systems around food would be set up to make it easy. Fresh food available always, cooking handled by machines, cleanup invisible. You'd eat better and enjoy it more because you wouldn't be tired from making it happen. The evening after dinner was television time for most families, but the television we had was just a hint of what was coming. The screen was supposed to get bigger and do so much more that it would change what it meant to spend time at home. The television screen would cover most of a wall, not a little box in the corner, but a whole wall that showed you the world. The picture would be so clear and detailed that it would feel like looking through a window. Color, obviously. Color was already arriving, but color so rich and true that it would be better than real life. You'd be able to watch anything, not just the few channels that broadcasted, but anything that had ever been filmed. Movies, shows, documentaries, all available whenever you wanted them. You'd have a box of some kind, or a disc, or maybe just a connection, and you could pull up whatever you wanted to watch. The whole family could vote on it, and moments later it would be playing. But television would also be a telephone. You'd see the person you were talking to. They'd see you. The screen on the wall would show your sister across the country, or your parents in another state, and you could talk to them face to face even though they were far away. This seemed like it would happen soon. The technology was almost there. A few more years of development and every home would have it. The video telephone meant you'd never really be separated from the people you cared about. Distance would stop mattering in the same way. You could have dinner with family who lived 1,000 miles away. You could see your grandchildren growing up even if they were on the other coast. Loneliness would decrease because connection would be so easy. The screen would also be a library. You could look up any information you needed, not by going somewhere, not by making phone calls, just by asking the screen. It would show you encyclopedia entries or news from around the world, or instructions for fixing something, or recipes, or anything else you might want to know. All the knowledge that existed right there in your living room. Children would learn differently. Instead of just reading textbooks, they'd watch lessons on the screen. They'd see history happening, science being demonstrated, geography shown through actual footage of places around the world. Learning would be more vivid, more engaging, easier to absorb. Some people imagined screens in every room, a small one in the kitchen for recipes and shopping, one in the bedroom for news in the morning, even screens outside, public screens showing information, entertainment, whatever people needed. The screen would become as common as windows. Shopping would happen through the screen. You'd see products displayed, choose what you wanted, and it would be delivered. No more driving to stores, walking through aisles, carrying bags. You'd sit in your living room, browse through everything available, and it would arrive at your door. We thought about this because television had already changed how we spent our evenings. Before television, people read or listened to the radio or visited neighbors. Television pulled everyone together in the living room around a shared experience. The next version would do that even more, but with more choice, more control, more connection to the wider world. The evening at home would become richer. You'd be entertained, but also informed. You'd be connected to family far away. You'd learn things, shop for things, manage your life, all from the comfort of the couch. The screen would be the center of home life, but in a way that brought people together rather than isolating them. Nobody worried much about watching too much television. The concern people sometimes had was whether there'd be enough good content for all those hours, all those channels. The answer seemed to be yes. There would be so much to watch, so much to learn, so much to experience through that wall-sized screen that you'd never run out of options. Summer vacation was supposed to change in ways that made everything else seem small. The beach would still be nice, the mountains would still be beautiful, but they'd be ordinary compared to where you could really go. Space tourism was coming. Not in 100 years, soon, maybe by 1980, maybe by 1990. Families would save up for a trip to an orbital hotel, the way families saved up for a trip to Europe or Hawaii. It would be expensive at first, but the price would come down, just like airplane tickets had gotten cheaper over the years. The trip would start from a spaceport. You'd drive there or maybe fly there on a regular airplane. You'd check in, go through some kind of preparation, maybe some training, and then board a rocket ship that looked sleek and comfortable inside, not so different from an airplane, just pointed up instead of forward. The launch would be exciting but safe. They'd done it enough times by then that it would be routine. You'd feel the power, feel yourself pressed back in your seat, and then the smooth transition to weightlessness. Kids would love it. Floating, bouncing off walls gently, looking out windows at the Earth getting smaller below. The hotel in orbit would be huge, spinning slowly to create some gravity, or maybe not spinning. Maybe everyone would just float. Rooms with windows showing Earth and stars. Restaurants where food came in squeeze tubes or specially designed containers, and eating would be part of the adventure. Maybe swimming pools where the water formed floating spheres you could swim through. You'd stay for a week, maybe 2. You'd watch Earth turn below you. You'd see sunrises every 90 minutes as the hotel orbited. You'd spot your home country, your state maybe, if the weather was clear. At night, you'd see city lights spread across the continents. It would be the most beautiful thing you'd ever seen. For the more adventurous, there'd be trips to the moon. The moon would have a base by then, a colony, a place where people lived and worked. But it would also have a hotel for visitors. You'd land in a small rocket, step out onto the surface in a spacesuit, bounce around in the low gravity. You'd collect moon rocks as souvenirs. You'd take pictures of Earth hanging in the black sky, bright and blue and impossibly beautiful. The moon hotel would be underground, probably, or under domes, protected from radiation, from temperature extremes. Inside, it would be comfortable. You could take the spacesuit off and live normally, except with 1/6 the gravity. Everything would feel light. Moving would be effortless. Kids would jump and float and laugh. These trips would be honeymoon destinations. Families would go for big anniversaries. Graduation presents for exceptional students. The trip of a lifetime, except it wouldn't be once in a lifetime because you could go back. Maybe the first generation would only go once, but your kids would go multiple times. Your grandkids would grow up thinking of space as just another place to visit. We believed this because the space program was real and moving fast. We'd put people in orbit. We were going to the moon soon by the end of the decade, they promised. If we could do it now for exploration, we'd do it later for tourism. The progression seemed clear. The rocket ships would get bigger and carry more people. The cost per passenger would drop. Companies would build the hotels because there'd be money in it. People would pay to experience weightlessness, to see Earth from space, to walk on the moon. It was just a matter of time, and not much time at that. The family vacation to space would be talked about the way families talked about their trip to Disneyland or Yellowstone. You'd show pictures, tell stories, remember the feeling of floating, the view of home from far away. It would become part of the normal range of human experience, something unusual but not unimaginable, something that regular people did when they wanted to do something really special. As the day ended and you got ready for sleep in the house that took care of itself, the bigger picture came into focus. All these changes, all this technology, all this progress wasn't just about convenience. It was about something deeper. The future we imagined was peaceful, not just the absence of war, though that too, but a deeper kind of peace that came from having enough. Enough food, enough comfort, enough time. When machines did the hard work and resources were plentiful, what would people fight about? The causes of conflict would disappear. Hunger would end, not through charity, but through abundance. Food would be so easy to produce, through automation and laboratory growth and perfect farming, that no one would go without. Every person on earth would have enough to eat, good food, nutritious food, food they actually enjoyed. Hunger would become a thing people read about in history books. Disease would be defeated. Medicine was already making huge advances. We'd cured things that killed our grandparents. The next generation of medicine would cure what still troubled us. Cancer would be treatable, heart disease preventable. Maybe even aging itself would slow down. People would live longer, healthier lives without pain, without deterioration. The developing world would catch up. The technology spreading through America would spread everywhere. Every country would have automated factories, clean water, reliable electricity, comfortable homes. The gap between rich and poor nations would close. Everyone would benefit from progress, not just some people in some places. This meant war would become obsolete. Nations fought over resources, over land, over wealth. But in a world of abundance, where technology could provide everything everyone needed, what would be worth fighting over? Disputes would still happen, but they'd be settled through talking, through negotiation, because the stakes would be lower. No one would be desperate enough to fight. The bomb, the terrible weapon that haunted us, would become unnecessary. Maybe it would even be dismantled. If no one needed to fight, why keep weapons? The resources spent on military could go to building, creating, making life better. The scientists working on weapons could work on curing diseases or exploring space. Children growing up in this future would think of war the way we thought of the ancient Roman gladiators. Something that happened long ago. Something barbaric. Something that didn't make sense anymore. They'd grow up safe, well-fed, educated, with opportunities we couldn't quite imagine. Work would be lighter, as we've said. But that lightness would change how people felt about life. Less stress, less exhaustion, less worry about money and security. People would be kinder to each other when they weren't worn down. Families would be stronger when they had time to be together. Communities would be closer when people had energy for each other. The environment would be cleaner. Pollution was a problem we could see, but it was also a problem we were solving. New engines that didn't smoke, new factories that didn't dump waste, clean energy from atoms or the sun, cities under domes with filtered air. The earth would heal from the industrial age, and the new technology would be gentle. This vision of peace wasn't naive to us. It was logical. It was what progress meant. Every generation had it better than the last. Every decade brought solutions to old problems. The curve pointed toward a world where suffering decreased, where comfort increased, where people had what they needed and could focus on what mattered. We believed in this future because we'd seen so much change already, and almost all of it had been for the better. We had medicines our grandparents never dreamed of. We had machines that made work easier. We had communication that connected us. We had education that was spreading. Why would that stop? Why wouldn't it continue until it reached its natural conclusion? A world where everyone had enough and no one needed to struggle. The peaceful tomorrow wasn't guaranteed, but it seemed likely. It seemed like where we were headed. And that made the present easier to bear, knowing that our children and grandchildren would live in that better world. We were building it for them. Every new invention, every technological leap, every improvement was a step toward the future where peace would be the natural state of things, because all the reasons for conflict would have disappeared. As you drifted off to sleep in your automated bed, in your climate-controlled room, in the house that thought for itself, you could imagine that future clearly. Your children floating in a hotel in space, your grandchildren living in a city under a dome, a world where everyone had enough, where machines did the hard work, where people were free to be their best selves. That was the future we were promised. That was the future we believed in. And believing in it felt good, felt right, felt like the most natural thing in the world.